Well, our next presenter, she might be from that other side of the mountain. I won't hold it against you today. But her impact and her work reaches across the entire West and across the state. Nancy Smith has worked for nearly two decades with the Nature Conservancy, developing, implementing, and managing conservation strategies to protect critical lands and our water resources. If you would help me, here to discuss climate resilience, please welcome Nancy Smith with the Nature Conservancy. Nancy is the Nature Conservancy Director, the Colorado River Program Director for the Nature Conservancy. Nancy, please, round of applause.
Excellent. So great to be here. I want to thank you, Brad, for that introduction, and thank you to Xcel Energy. The Nature Conservancy works with Xcel through the Colorado Forum on climate partnerships, and we really appreciate that. Thank you very much to Club 20. It is a true honor to be here, not just because I'm so desperate to see real human beings, not on Zoom, but also just I've worked with this organization for most of my career, and it's such a privilege to be considered someone that you'd like to partner with. And also, I want to thank Colorado Mesa University. This is a great university. The Hutchins Center, the Water Center here does some fantastic convening. Highly encourage you to check out the events that they convene around the very types of topics we're discussing today. And also, I have very fond memories of this university from when I was a high school student at Girls State running around the university. I also want to thank Christian and her staff for finding that photo of me. It's over a decade old, and just like Jeff mentioned earlier today, it was a thrill to see myself looking so young and youthful. Yes, it is the after lunch session. When Christian called, we had a very lovely discussion, but I wondered if it was just a tiny bit of a setup to have the post-lunch session and to also have a title called Climate Resilience. I know that resilience can be a bit of a buzzword, a word that maybe politicians use. I didn't pick the title, Christian did, and then I thought, oh my gosh, is she also setting me up because she knows I'm an East Slope native and she's bringing me into Club 20? And then of course, Brad had to mention it. But I thought about it for a while and I thought, nope, this is not a setup, because actually the Nature Conservancy has huge alignment with Club 20. We are both organizations that believe in consensus-driven problem solving, bringing all the right people to the table. We've heard a lot of talk about that already today. We believe in who should be at that table: counties, cities, business, ag, tribal nations, natural resource managers. The Nature Conservancy also really focuses on those collaborative consensus building forums for creating solutions. And also, the Nature Conservancy, we have a long history of working on the West Slope with working on sustainable grazing partnerships with the ranching community, working with entities like Tri-State in the Yampa Valley. I had a great chance encounter with L.V. Barton from Salt River Project in Arizona. We work with water providers like the Salt River Project in Arizona. We were wagging our jaws about some of my TNC colleagues down there she works with. We work closely with Business for Water. We work with Coca-Cola. We have great corporate partnership with Coca-Cola. And so the Nature Conservancy and Club 20, we believe in working with the same types of people to come up with solutions that are going to last for the future. And in terms of the title of the talk, Resilience, I realized actually it's not a setup to give me that title. That even though climate resilience is a bit of a buzzword and it can turn people off, that really what it means, it's just about thinking about how do we create a future that will allow the Western Slope, its rural communities and agriculture to thrive for another 100+ years. That's what Club 20 cares about. That's what the Nature Conservancy cares about. So I decided actually there's perfect alignment. It's great to be here. And what are we aligned around when it comes to climate resilience? I want to talk to you about, as I said, resilience is really just about how do we come together collaboratively to address how rising temperatures on the Western Slope are threatening the communities and all of the value that the communities of the Western Slope have built. The economic vitality, the thriving agricultural community, et cetera. And the thing is that, you know, I'm talking about climate change resilience, but the fact of the matter is that in my work with Western Slope communities, you are living it. You are experiencing it day after day. You've experienced the change. You've witnessed that spring is coming earlier, that the snow is melting and running off faster, that the summers are hotter. You're living it already, and you're starting to figure out how to adapt. This morning's presentations were fantastic about how people are coming together throughout the West to figure out how do we adapt, how do we innovate and adapt to preserve the communities and the values that we have built on the Western Slope. And yes, I just said we. Even though I might live on the Eastern Slope, I feel that I do work primarily with the Western Slope. So I'm gonna use the royal we with your permission, with your gracious permission. The fact of the matter is that challenge it can drive either conflict or it can drive innovation and collaboration. We all have a choice. I would say that without a doubt, today has demonstrated yet again that Club 20 has already made its choice. It has chosen creative, innovative, consensus-oriented problem solving. And I'm very pleased to be here as part of that conversation. And why is it important? Why is thinking about climate resilience make a difference? So what climate change for the West, it basically comes down to impacting the things that the West needs to thrive. Climate change in the West means drought. That's how it translates here. You know, in some communities, they need to worry about rising sea levels. That's not what we need to worry about. We need to worry about rising temperatures and how they impact drought. This is the national drought map from December. And I don't need to tell you about the drought we've all been experiencing. It is historic in the Colorado River Basin, of course. This time we had the first ever Tier 1 official shortage declared, which means that Arizona and Nevada and the country of Mexico are not going to get their first legal allocation for the first time in history. It is unprecedented times we are living in. Climate change in the West is also going to mean, as this conference has been titled, it is going to mean increased wildfires. I don't need to tell you that Colorado experienced its 3 largest wildfires in history in 2020. The fire season is already months longer than it was in the 1970s. And it also is going to mean impacts to snow. And snow, you know, we don't talk about snow that often, but Chuck Collum, who's the new Upper Colorado River Commission director, he was at the Colorado River Water Users Association meeting in December where I was, which I'm sure some of you were there too. And he said if there's one thing that he would tell people about what matters in the Colorado River Basin, the first thing he'd say is snow matters. We don't talk a lot about it, but forest management and protecting the water towers of the West is about protecting our natural reservoir for snow. The vast majority of water in the Colorado River Basin originates as snow in the forested headwaters of Colorado and Utah and a bit of Wyoming. And so I am going to be talking today about the connection between forest management, watershed management, and the importance of thinking about our snowpack as something that needs to be carefully managed. For instance, I just want to give you an example of how snowpack makes a difference. In 2020, we had good snowpack. snowpack was at 80% by the end of the season in the western slope, but due to dry soils that have been parched by 2 decades of drought, and due to fast forest runoff, due to rising temperatures, our runoff was only 30%. And that's more and more what we're facing with climate change in the West. Decent snowpack translates, an 80% snowpack can still translate into 30% of normal runoff. So I also want to urge us to think about forest management before the fire as snowpack management. So I'll talk a bit about that today. I'm going to, and I just want to make one quick summary point. We've had some great presentations today, really focused on exciting collaborative things happening around fuels reduction. We've had some great hands-on case studies. And what I want to do is take a step back and say, okay, how do we take those immediate concerns of fuels reduction as we think about next year's fire season or the next 3 years of fire seasons? How do we actually then start to see how that all fits into this 100+ year goal of creating and adapting to climate change in general? So that's my exciting thought exercise for you for our conversation here. How do we take those conversations and those immediate thoughts about planning for fuels reduction and thinking about mitigating so we don't have another Grizzly Creek situation happening, and then step back and say, and then how do we put those puzzle pieces into a picture that makes sense for creating long-term resilience for the long haul, which is what we need to think about in terms of our changing climate. Okay. Here's some of those historic events I mentioned. I'm not going to read off these depressing statistics. I'll let you do that. But that picture, I think, says a lot. That's part of the historic situation we're in. Lake Powell is, I just heard we're actually down to 25% of capacity right now. We were in the 30s earlier. And as I mentioned, of course, extended fire season is what climate change looks like in the West. So I am going to frame a lot of my conversation in terms of the Colorado River Basin. That's where I work. That's, of course, we are in the headwaters right now of the Colorado River Basin. Our friends in the San Luis Valley, they are not in the basin, but they face some of the similar issues with the Rio Grande Basin. And I just wanted to, I put up these statistics here to just remind us all that protecting our water towers is protecting our thriving economy. You know, the Colorado River supports 15% of all the irrigated crops in the country. In Arizona, my colleague Elvie, if you eat any lettuce, how many of you have had lettuce or carrots this winter? That came from Arizona. And that was, you were eating Colorado River water as you ate that. And so thinking about climate resilience for the Colorado River means thinking about economic vitality for us going forward. And I do not want to underestimate the recreation economy. So many of the communities on the West Slope are finding that having a thriving, healthy environment that hunters can come hunt in, rafters can come raft in, that's a critical part of the local economy as well. And the Colorado River Basin supports a $26 billion recreation economy. So climate resilience means economic resilience too for our communities. Just to really drive it home for us, I have to give a few more doom and gloom before I get to the good news. This is a map. I got this map from Andy Mueller at the Colorado River District, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, but he sent his slides. This is a map that actually the Washington Post got the data together for this, and it shows that is the Colorado River District. It doesn't quite cover the full area of Club 20, and Andy apologizes for that, but it shows the deep dark colors show rising temperatures. And the fact of the matter is that the area that Club 20 serves is in the bullseye of rising temperatures and climate change in the lower 48. We have the largest hotspot in the entire lower 48 and the highest temperature increase of the entire country. So climate change is real here, and the urgency is real. And again, I just want to emphasize that the science is just confirming what all of you already know. Here's just some specific temperatures. And I'll note that, you know, rising temperatures translates into reduced flows in our rivers, our tributaries, our irrigation systems. For every increase of 1 degree increase in temperatures, scientists estimate that flows will decrease by 2 to 5%. It's hard to make sense of those numbers. An easier way to think about it is that since 2000, flows have decreased by 20% throughout the Colorado River Basin, or enough to provide water for 14 million households for a year. And half of that increase is basically scientists have attributed to climate change and rising temperatures. So climate resilience matters because it matters for our water supplies. Oh, there you go. I can't believe I remembered it, but there it is. So now I'm going to get to the good news, if there is good news in all this. What I want to talk about is thinking about climate resilience fits into this conference, because resilience is, you have to think about resilience before the fire. We want to increase our resilience before disaster hits. And while a wildfire is a tangible event in time, it's a little hard to think about before climate change really hits in a way. Fire takes on a bigger meaning when you're thinking about that long-term impacts of temperature rising from climate change. But there are things we can do. There's a web address there. The Nature Conservancy, along with a number of other NGOs, Trout Unlimited, folks you've probably worked with, American Rivers, we got together and worked with some researchers to look into strategies to increase climate resilience in the Colorado River Basin. And I want to emphasize, these are community-based solutions. These are solutions that entities like Club 20 and all of its members, that you will execute with your partners. They're not necessarily, these are not top-down solutions that are going to come from Washington. Washington needs to be part of the solutions. I was very excited to see that Senator Bennett is speaking tomorrow, and Congresswoman Boebert, and I had the pleasure of meeting one of Senator Hickenlooper's staffers at lunch. So certainly Washington needs to be part of it, but I want to emphasize that these solutions and these strategies are community-based, and they're going to take all of the solution makers coming to the table. This report, I really hope you'll jot down the web address and take a look at it later. It provides tangible, concrete ideas to counter the sort of doom and gloom stories that we hear so often about what's happening with climate change in the West. Ways that communities can adapt to the change, reduce pressure on water supplies, and strengthen local economies, and strengthen the health of watersheds, which is, of course, what this conference has been about. It's interesting, the folks on the West Slope, you are already know a lot of the solutions necessary, the types of floodplain restoration projects that, I apologize, I'm gonna forget his name right now just because I'm on the podium, but a gentleman spoke about earlier, fuels reduction projects. Solutions are already happening, but this report also, it brings them together and also talks about some new approaches to help communities respond to, mitigate climate change impacts in ways that will help local economies, communities, landscapes, and natural resources. The report looked at these strategies through the lens of, one, how can it help communities adapt to ongoing climate shifts, and how can it reduce pressure on water supplies? And how can people collaborate to make them happen? Okay, and I want to, before I start going into some of the strategies, I do want to note, especially because Business for Water is a sponsor of this program, as you are all thinking about how to build these consensus-oriented solutions, please keep in mind the Nature Conservancy as a partner. We do have science. We're a science-based organization. We can help provide technical assistance, and also we can help to bring private dollars, just like Business for Water, to the mix. And I think these solutions for long-term climate resilience, let's be honest, they're going to be expensive. Forest management that needs to happen at the scale that we need to see in the West is going to be very expensive. Let's be honest about it. Good news is that there are a lot of federal resources available. The state is doing what it can to make state resources available to leverage that federal money. And organizations like the Nature Conservancy and the NGO community in general, and entities like Business for Water, we are willing to join and bring private money to the table. And it's going to take that kind of cross-sector partnership to make these big investments that have to be made. Okay, let's quickly go through. I'm going to focus on, today I'm really only going to give you a taste of a few of the strategies that are most relevant to our topic today. I'm going to focus on forest management and restoration, a light touch on ag, and then natural distributed storage. There's all 10 of the strategies that you'll find in this report, but we're going to focus on those 3. Okay, forest management and restoration. Truth, I am not a scientist. I will be honest with you. I am an attorney and have an MBA, so I am a little embarrassed to even talk about forestry. So my forestry colleagues in the audience will hopefully give me a pass here. But throughout this conference, folks are talking about forestry as a tool, as Dan Gibbs' talk is entitled tomorrow. And Mr. Johnson's going to talk about that as well. Without a doubt, increasing resilience means increasing the resilience of our forests. And there's so many reasons to do it. Beyond just wildfire mitigation is absolutely critical, but here's all the co-benefits. Healthier forests can reduce treatment costs for communities, water treatment costs, obviously mitigate fire intensity. And there are a variety of tools. We had Jeff talked a bit about prescribed fire. Of course, there's thinning, can improve water quality, and then snowpack management, which I mentioned. There is some very interesting experimental research going on by Keith Musselman and Joel Biederman at the USDA in really getting a better handle on how can forest management improve our ability to capture snowpack, retain snowpack, slow down runoff so that it has time to percolate into groundwater tables, et cetera. And then influencing watershed hydrology. You know, there's a lot of very interesting work going on looking at how can forest management help maintain the natural hydrology of our systems that have evolved in the West, not only to benefit all of the downstream users who rely on slow, steady melt of snowpack, but also the species. Folks on the West Slope, you know, we work very, very closely with ranchers. In Colorado, we have worked with ranching communities to, you know, put conservation easements and help ranchers steward their land the way that they want to. And to a T, every rancher I've ever worked with is incredibly proud of the wildlife habitat that she or he creates on their land. And these forest management techniques can help improve wildlife habitat too, which is an important co-benefit. Again, we're talking about holistic watershed health that does translate into direct economic benefit for communities. Natural distributed storage. This is I always like to talk about this strategy for resilience in close proximity to forest management, because I think they're very connected, because they're both looking at the forested headwaters of our systems. And my colleague Jackie Corday is here, and I'm also a little embarrassed to talk about this when she is in the audience, because she's the true expert. But There is a lot of very interesting work going on in the state. I encourage all of you to look out for these opportunities around natural distributed storage projects. A phrase being used quite a bit in Colorado is process-based restoration. Natural infrastructure, you might hear all those phrases. Some of the bipartisan infrastructure package does have money set aside for natural infrastructure. So, you know, we've got traditional infrastructure in terms of dams and roads, but also our forests are natural infrastructure. And I want to tip my hat to Senator Bennett, who's working to make sure some of that federal funding can be used to protect our equally important natural infrastructure of forests. We had a great talk earlier today about floodplain restoration, which is critical to improving groundwater recharge, regulating floodwaters. I remember a few years ago when I was working on the Yampa River Fund with Routt and Moffat counties, and folks in Routt County were talking, the county commissioner was telling me how happy he was that there was plenty of connected floodplain in the Yampa headwaters because it had protected the town of Steamboat Springs from flooding. Showed some very dramatic photos. So, you know, yet another example of where a naturally functioning floodplain can provide direct economic benefits to a city by buffering that city from floods. And of course, natural distributed storage or natural infrastructure projects can help to increase filtration and clean water, reduce treatment costs. I wanted to show this graphic. This is from my colleagues at American Rivers. For those of you who aren't sure what natural distributed storage or process-based restoration projects look like, it typically is about wet meadow restoration in the headwaters. And this graphic here shows on the left side, you've got a incised, channel. Essentially, let's just call it an unhealthy wet meadow. My scientist friends would cringe to hear me use that simple term, but it's good enough for me. And, you know, a lot of mesic vegetation, that you don't have good water storage in the soils are drier. If you can restore that meadow so it slows the water, allows it to more naturally percolate, you can reestablish healthy vegetation. That can be really good news for ranchers who are more interested in that diverse set of forage grasses. It's great news for wildlife. It's great news for downstream water users. This is a picture from some colleagues the picture on the left is from Idaho, Joe Wheaton, a book he did on process-based restoration. And this also shows another side benefit of healthy wet meadows. I don't know if you noticed, but everything is black in that photo except the bottom where there has been some process-based restoration that has gone on. They can serve as very effective fire breaks. This photo is from the Colorado River headwaters in the right-hand corner above Kremling. And it shows another example of that's a oh my gosh, I'm getting so many names. Twin Forks fire. Sorry, I'm forgetting the name of that fire. And again, when it hit the headwaters and the healthy wet meadows in the headwaters of the Colorado River, it also served as a fire break. It's an additional benefit of these types of projects. And this is one last picture just to show you that actually this kind of low-tech process-based restoration can also happen in sagebrush habitats. This is a picture of BLM, Nature Conservancy, and local ranchers building very low-tech structures down near Gunnison to increase wet meadow habitat for Gunnison sage grouse. It's good for their cattle. It was good for the sage grouse, which these ranchers were very proud to provide habitat for. And it was a win for, the organizations like BLM and Nature Conservancy who were interested in protecting habitat. So these process-based restoration techniques happen in a variety of habitats. Regenerative agriculture. Okay, this is regenerative agriculture is it's a tricky term. I like to think of it more in terms of things that just can help to make agriculture really stable for the long haul. And I just want to acknowledge up front some of the changes to agricultural practices that will be required to increase climate resilience can be challenging in the short term, but they are intended to preserve the long-term viability of agriculture. And, you know, last year and the year before that, I think showed our agricultural community what the future could look like in a climate changed future where you've got really hot temperatures and less water. There was a lot of acres fallowed, but regenerative ag practices are about increasing soil moisture so that the ag can be viable for the long term. And NGOs are looking to partner with ag producers throughout the West to experiment with some of these things. And then agricultural upgrades, this is just a shout out to, I think Jeff Comstock is here. You know, NGOs are partnering to use to funnel infrastructure money to upgrade some of our antiquated water diversion and irrigation structures throughout the West. We just, you know, we've got an incredible legacy of 100-plus-year-old irrigation infrastructure that needs some upgrading to remain resilient and sustainable into a future where we have less water. Okay, I'm not going to go into urban conservation and reuse, but I just wanted to give you a hint that those things will be, you'll also find those in the report. Right now, we're in the phase of trying to get as many demonstration projects done in partnership with people like you, members and the members of Club 20. We're trying to do research to really show in a quantitative way that these kinds of strategies can help to ensure long-term viability. And I'd love to end with this slide. I always use this slide. For those of you who can't read it in the back, it says, all I'm saying is now is the time to develop the technology to deflect an asteroid. And I thought this was perfect for the theme of this conference. You know, now before the fire, whether it's the literal wildfires we need to worry about or the metaphorical fire of rising temperatures and climate change, now is the time for us to invest in these long-term strategies, to think creatively and to really come together collaboratively. And I thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk about that and hope I can work with you in the future. And Christian, I think we have a few minutes for questions. Great. Okay, ask away. Hi, Chris.
Have one in the back, Nancy. Hello.
Nice to see you.
Commissioner, please introduce yourself. Ask your question.
Chris. This is Gary Moyer, Commissioner in Rio Blanco County. And the thing that jumped out to me in your presentation is when you were talking about the benefits of having a healthy forest and how we get there. And quite frankly, having some background in that area, there was one thing, and maybe it's just obvious, but that I feel is missing there. And that is the fact that it all starts with managing to have healthy trees. It starts with healthy trees. And when you lose healthy trees, you lose everything else. And I'd like to say this should be a new effort, but in fact, it's a renewed effort. They being the landowners, the Forest Service, et cetera, managed our forests for healthy trees for decades and decades, and they quit doing that. We don't have foresters in these local offices that go out and actually pay attention to the health of the tree, and we don't have the authority for them to actually do anything if they find an insect outbreak or something along that line. In the past, they did. These foresters had the authority to write a salvage sale, and there was a healthy forest products industry that they could utilize. This isn't something new, but my bigger point is, if you don't look at the health of that tree and manage accordingly, the wildlife, everything else is lost. Thank you.
Thank you. And I am going to unfortunately have to pull my I am not a forest expert card. But what I want to acknowledge is that what I hear you saying is that what may have been business usual for the past however many years, you know, you're saying that in the past there was one approach taken, then that shifted. I do feel like there is an understanding and an urgency that it's time to put all potential solutions back on the table and look at them through careful planning. I am not a forest expert, so I can't tell you what the right solutions are, but I do want to say that it's heartening for me to see groups like this coming together and having these conversations. And you know, the state forester is here, and so I hope you'll talk to him later, because I can't talk to you about tree health, though I wish I could. Anybody else?
Nancy, in a vacuum. Oh, we have another question. I was going to throw in one of my own, but I will defer.
Good afternoon, LV Barton with Salt River Project. When you talked about climate resiliency and looking how to achieve landscape scale restoration and knowing that there's not enough federal, state, or philanthropic dollars to achieve all the work that needs to get done, we have to move to other type of financing mechanisms. We have looked at carbon and water benefits as a way to finance restoration projects, which has never really been done on federal lands in the western states in terms of thinning trees. And I was wondering if you could possibly speak if there's anything TNC has done in terms of looking at carbon and water benefits to help finance restoration projects.
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to give a shout out. Salt River Project is doing some very interesting things. So glad that you're speaking tomorrow. I will say one thing that in terms of different financing mechanisms, there's some really interesting funds going on in California. There's some really interesting experimentation going on, and some of that is happening on public federal land where, for lack of a better word, let's call them impact investors, people who are interested in bringing private capital to forest management projects at very, very low interest rates. In some cases, there are folks who are even happy with a 0% interest return. These do have a low interest return, but they're being sold, these bonds are being sold to municipalities as risk management. So you've got carbon as a way to generate money, you've got water benefits as a way to generate money, you've got risk like an insurance policy. There are entities that are willing to invest in landscape scale interventions, let's call them, to manage their risk, as in through an insurance policy, et cetera. So those are a variety of different private mechanisms going on, and some of that in California is happening on public land. So I think there's a lot of experimentation going on. The Nature Conservancy is working with corporations. There's some interest with corporations meeting their own need. They have their own targets, so they're willing to bring private capitals to some of these engagements. And I think that, LV, what you're pointing out is there are a lot of interesting mechanisms, and now is a ripe time for us to see how can we put those together to leverage federal money? How can we work with public agencies, with elected officials, to show that bringing private and public money together is going to allow us to operate on a bigger scale? And I'm very happy to send information to anyone who's interested. Actually, I don't know if my email address is in the program, but I could hook you up with a lot of the information about these very specific examples going on of unique financing mechanisms.
Hello, my name is Bill Edwards. We're the U.S. Forest Service local district ranger here in town.
A true forest expert.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I was a range guy, but I've worked with Nature Conservancy many times in some of my previous assignments, and they're great partners to work with. I've always loved y'all's approach of, as you just presented, look at things from a large regional climate level scale even to very small localized projects. And I guess my question to you is, does the Nature Conservancy have a substantial local presence on the Western Slope where we can be partnering with y'all for localized projects?
Excellent. Yes, we do. I've worked with some of you in this room. We have a very strong presence in the Yampa Valley. We have partnered very close with the Grand Valley Water Users Association. So we do have a presence right here in the Grand Valley. We have a very strong presence down in the southwest part of the state. And in fact, have worked very closely with the Southwest Colorado Water Conservancy District. We're on the advisory committee that advises how McPhee Reservoir is operated. We work closely with the Dolores Watershed Restoration effort down there. So certainly Southwest Colorado, here in the Grand Valley, Northwest Colorado, we work very closely with Paul Bruchet and all of the ranchers on the Kremling, in the Kremling area on the Upper Colorado, so a presence there. So we do have a presence on the Western Slope. We very much welcome partnering. I will say too, however, that we also have a basin-wide presence. So we look forward to partnering, continuing to partner and doing even more so in the future when it comes to influencing big basin-wide policy discussions that influence all of us. You know, the Western Slope is the headwaters of the whole Colorado River Basin. So decisions happening in that forum make a difference. Oh, I don't want to forget, I'm so sorry I forgot this. We also have a very robust partnership with the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. We have partnered with them on some efforts. But we're always available for more. Thank you so much.